Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan. This is going to be my January wrap-up for 2020, which I know it's a little late. It's April when I'm filming this, but I thought it would still be worth it to record my wrap-up to catch up so I can have all of my 2020 wrap-ups here on my channel. So the first book that I read this month was The Dilemma by B.A. Paris. B.A. Paris is a thriller author who I have read all of her books at this point, but this is her newest release. This book I got access to read on NetGalley, and I'm a little confused what the release date is. On NetGalley it said January, but I think that might be the UK publication date, and I think it might not be coming out to the US until June or July. But regardless, I got to read it in January, and it's about this mom who is throwing a 40th birthday party for herself. Her family's throwing it for her, and she's bummed out because her daughter is studying abroad overseas and can't make it home. And her husband, the dad, is planning on flying the daughter in for the party, but the mom doesn't know that, and then a bunch of things happen, drama at the party. The whole book takes place over 24 hours, so a little bit before the planning of the party, through the party, and then a little bit of the aftermath. I don't think I would call it a thriller, just because we kind of know everything that is going to happen from the beginning. We're just reading about all of the characters, figuring out what's happening. That being said, it was an entertaining read. It had me, wanting to get to the end just so I could see how all of this was going to play out, what the characters were going to think. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. I don't think it's as much of a thriller. There's not as many twists or reveals as some of her other books, but I still generally enjoyed it. The second book that I read in January was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This is another thriller writer who I've read all of her books now. Gone Girl is probably her most popular, and I loved that book and the movie, and have been disappointed by her other 2. So this one, like I just said, I was disappointed by it. It's about this young journalist reporter who's from a small town. She moves away and then ends up coming back after crime happens in the town, and she is on the case trying to figure out what happened. And as with all thrillers with that synopsis, she uncovers secrets about the town and her family, and that's about all you need to know. I was a little bit underwhelmed. It took me a while to get into the story. I don't know that I ever really did get into it. The payoff wasn't that great in my opinion. I was disappointed and hoping for more of a shocking twist or reveal or something to really hook me in at the end, but it never came. But I think I am in the minority, and I know a lot of people do really like this book, as well as her other thriller, Dark Places, which I also didn't love. So if you're a Gillian Flynn lover, still try it, but not my favorite, unfortunately. The third book that I read in January was another thriller. It was The Wives by Tarryn Fisher, which was just released in December, I think. And this book had a super interesting premise. So it's about this woman who is married to a man who has multiple wives, and this wife has never met any of the other wives. She doesn't know anything about them. She just knows that they exist, and that some days of the week her husband is spending his time with those other wives. And so she begins to get curious about what these other wives are like and what her husband is like with them, and so she starts to kind of dig into that. And so, like I said, that sounded super interesting and intriguing to me. I was really excited to read that story. Unfortunately, it didn't quite live up to it. I was hoping it would explore that multiple wives a little bit further, but it was more kind of about this one wife and how she is kind of going crazy, or how everyone around her treats her like she's crazy. And I don't love that trope in thrillers. It also didn't explain or wrap things up as much as I prefer in thrillers. I like for everything to really have a reason and an explanation, and this one didn't do that. So I think that if you are someone who likes more open-ended thrillers, then you might enjoy this book, and I would recommend it, but otherwise it was not my favorite. I ended up giving it 3 stars. The fourth book that I read in January was not a thriller. It's Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Now, if you have been on BookTube for any amount of time, I know that you've heard of this. It's a contemporary romance between the son of the first female president of the United States and the Prince of England. And it is kind of a hate to friends to lovers romance. It also dips a little bit into politics, as the president is up for re-election, and so the son is kind of invested in that campaign, and how his relationship with the Prince of England would affect that campaign positively or negatively. And I thought it was good. I am not in love with it as everyone else seems to be. I thought it was cute. Romance is not my favorite genre anyway, so I wasn't necessarily expecting this to be a new favorite book. 3 stars. Didn't hate it, didn't fall in love with it either, but it is beloved in the book community. So if you haven't read it, I would still recommend reading it. It's worth a read. And I also do appreciate kind of what it represents in the book community. I think the fact that a male-male romance like this became so hyped and so popular all over the internet is a really good thing. Obviously, more stories like this should be published, should be talked about, should be beloved by readers of all kinds. So I do appreciate that, and I'm glad to have read this one and to be in the know. The next book that I read in January is City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. One of my good friends in real life recommended that I read this book, and so I'm really glad that I did. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. What it is about is this young woman who moves to New York and lives with her aunt, I think it is, who owns like an old theater, and this young woman becomes the costume designer. Kind of gets intertwined with all of the performers and everyone involved in the show, and just kind of show business and the glitz and glam, and it's a lot of fun. And so I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I've heard some criticism about this book, mainly that it's really long, really drawn out, there's not much of a point to it, which may be true, but I kind of think that you're reading about her life to enjoy her life. There doesn't necessarily have to be this big lesson involved, or there doesn't have to be a point for every single scene and interaction and character, and I think that's okay for a book like this. It is kind of about the story, the journey, just her life in general, so I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read in January was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I listened to on audiobook, and I also had a physical copy from the library. I kind of read it in both formats, but the premise of the story is you're following this man named Aiden who is trying to solve the mystery of Evelyn Hardcastle's murder, but it's really unique in that he is waking up in a new character's body every day. And the story sounded, again, really interesting to me. I love that trope of waking up multiple times, reliving the same day, and I like that there was a mystery involved. It got very, very, very confusing to me. There are a lot of characters, and it kind of jumps timelines a little bit. It just got very confusing, and I think the ending would have been more satisfying if I had followed the story a little bit better, and probably if I read it again, I would get a lot more out of it. I can appreciate the complexity, but I gave it 3 stars. And the last book that I read in January, book number 7, is called Love Lettering by Kate Clayborn. And I was actually sent this book by a program called She Speaks. It's a romance between a woman who is a hand letterer, so she designs wedding invitations for people in pretty letters, and actually one of the men who she's designing a wedding invitation for. So it's a little bit forbidden, it's fun. I actually really liked it, like I just said earlier. I'm not a huge romance person, so I'm kind of surprised that this one got to me, but it did. I actually really liked the hand lettering aspect of it. It also did something really interesting where the main character, whenever she hears words, she sees them in her mind in different fonts or different ways of writing. So for example, if someone is talking to her in a really pointed, angry way, she might picture it in bold capital letters, whereas if someone's being very poetic, she pictures it in, cursive, and then a bunch of other kind of variations on that I thought was really interesting. And that also kind of reminded me of the book The Astonishing Color of After, where that main character sees and pictures feelings as colors. I thought that was a really interesting thing to read about. Yeah, this one was cute. It was a pretty quick read, and I really enjoyed it, so I gave it 4 stars. And that is all the books that I read in January, so 7 overall. Unfortunately, no 5 stars, no new favorites, but none that I really hated either. So with that, I will leave you. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching this video. I will have my February and March wrap-ups coming up very shortly so that I can be caught back up. Bye!